Jerry Lewis needed to use the bathroom. The show at the nightclub in Miami had just ended. Dean Martin had disappeared somewhere. Jerry walked into the men's room, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Dean Martin was standing against the wall, hands raised. A man in an expensive suit was pointing a .38 Special directly at Dean's stomach, and the look in the mobster's eyes said he was about to pull the trigger. This is the true story of the night Jerry Lewis saved Dean Martin's life, and how one split-second decision prevented a murder that would have changed Hollywood history forever. To understand what happened that night in the early 1950s, you need to understand the world Martin and Lewis were performing in. They were popular on television, but also toured the country performing in nightclubs, most of which were owned or controlled by the mob. This was particularly the case in South Florida. The double act was performing in Miami. Jerry Lewis, in his book, doesn't name the specific club, just in case there are people around who still remember the event. But what happened there almost ended in tragedy. Dean Martin and Jerry Lewis were at the absolute peak of their partnership. Martin and Lewis were the hottest act in America during the early 50s, as well as the highest paid act in show business. Every show they did was sold out. Every nightclub owner in America wanted them. But that fame came with a price. The clubs they performed in weren't family establishments. They were mob-owned operations. Illegal gambling in back rooms, money laundering, connections to organized crime families from New York to Chicago to Miami. And the men who ran these places, they weren't businessmen. They were killers. Dean Martin understood this better than most entertainers. He'd grown up in Steubenville, Ohio, where his father's barber shop was a front for illegal gambling operations. Dean knew these men. He knew how they thought. He knew what they were capable of. But Dean also had a problem. He was a ladies' man, and he couldn't help himself when he saw a beautiful woman. That night in Miami, Martin and Lewis were performing their usual act. Dean would sing, Jerry would interrupt with physical comedy. The crowd would roar with laughter. It was the same routine they'd done 1,000 times. But this night was different. There was a young woman in the audience who caught Dean's eye. She was sitting with a rather grumpy-looking boyfriend. Dean did what he generally did when he spied a gorgeous girl in the audience. He performed entirely to her, singing and flirting from the stage. The woman was beautiful, dark hair, stunning figure, and Dean, being Dean, couldn't resist. He sang directly to her. He winked at her. He made her the focus of his entire performance. The audience loved it. They always did. That was part of Dean's charm, making every woman in the room feel like she was the only one that mattered. But the grumpy-looking boyfriend sitting next to her, he didn't love it at all. The show ended. The crowd gave Martin and Lewis a standing ovation. Dean and Jerry took their bows and walked off stage. Jerry headed toward the dressing room, but Dean went toward the bar, probably to get a drink, maybe to see if that beautiful woman from the audience was still around. Jerry made his way to the men's room. He pushed open the door, and that's when he saw it. Dean and the young lady's grumpy boyfriend were standing face to face, but what Jerry noticed immediately was that the boyfriend was pointing a .38 Special directly at Dean's stomach, and the look in the mobster's eyes said he was about to pull the trigger. Time seemed to stop. Jerry's mind raced. The boyfriend, this wasn't just some jealous guy. Jerry recognized the type immediately. The expensive suit, the cold eyes, the way he held the gun with complete confidence.
This was a mobster, and he was about to kill Dean Martin. Dean's face was white. His hands were slightly raised in a gesture of surrender. He wasn't moving. He wasn't speaking. He was just staring at the gun pointed at his gut. The mobster's voice was low and dangerous. "You think you're funny, Martin? You think you can disrespect me in front of everyone? Make my girl look at you like that?" Jerry's instincts kicked in. He explains that these crazy gangsters have hair-trigger tempers and are likely to bump anyone off given the slightest provocation and think no more about it. Jerry knew that if he didn't do something right now, Dean Martin was about to die in a nightclub bathroom in Miami, shot by a jealous mobster over a woman Dean had only looked at. Without thinking, Jerry stepped between the two men. The gun was now pointing at his stomach. The mobster's eyes widened slightly. He hadn't expected anyone to walk in, and he definitely hadn't expected someone to step between him and his target. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Jerry said, his voice high and nervous, his comedy voice, the one he used on stage. "Let's everybody just take a breath here." The mobster didn't lower the gun. "Get out of the way, Lewis. This doesn't concern you." Jerry's heart was pounding so hard he thought it might explode out of his chest, but he didn't move. He stayed between the gun and Dean. Jerry then, to put it into his words, proceeded to do the verbal tap dance of my life. "Listen, friend," Jerry said, holding up his hands, "you have to understand, people make mistakes. That's why they have erasers on pencils." The mobster stared at him. His finger was still on the trigger. Jerry kept talking, fast, desperate, using every ounce of his comedic timing to defuse the situation. "Dean made a mistake when he had crooned at your girlfriend, but I'm offering you my hand to shake, and I'm giving you my word of honor that I will make sure that Dean never does it again." Jerry extended his hand toward the mobster. His hand was shaking. "In other words," Jerry continued, "I'm apologizing on behalf of my partner here. He didn't mean any disrespect. He's a singer. He sings to pretty ladies. It's what he does. It's his job. But he didn't know she was with you. If he'd known, he never would have done it." The mobster's jaw was clenched. His eyes were cold and calculating. Jerry could see him weighing his options. Kill them both? Kill just Dean? Let it go? "Please," Jerry said, his voice quieter now. "He's sorry. I'm sorry. We didn't mean any disrespect. Just let us go, and I promise you'll never see us near your girl again." Jerry was groveling. He knew it. Dean knew it. The mobster knew it. But Jerry didn't care. He'd grovel all day if it meant saving Dean's life. The seconds stretched into what felt like hours. The bathroom was silent except for the sound of their breathing. And then, slowly, the mobster lowered the gun. Giving Dean and Jerry evil looks, he holstered his gun and left the men's room. The door swung shut behind him. Dean collapsed against the wall, his legs nearly giving out. Jerry stood there, his whole body trembling. They stared at each other for a long moment. Neither one could speak. Finally, Dean found his voice. "Jesus Christ, Jer." Jerry's hands were still shaking. "What the hell were you thinking, Dean? That guy's girlfriend?" "I didn't know she was with him," Dean said, his voice shaky. I saw her and I started singing to her. I didn't—" "You almost got yourself killed," Jerry shouted. The fear was turning into anger now. "That guy was going to shoot you, right here in this bathroom." Dean ran his hair through his head. I know. God, Jerry, I thought I was dead." "You would have been dead if I hadn't walked in. What were you even doing in here with him?" Dean shook his head. "He followed me. I came in here to splash some water on my face, and he walked in behind me, locked the door, pulled out the gun." Jerry leaned against the sink, trying to steady his breathing. "We need to get out of this club, right now. Pack up and leave Miami tonight." Dean nodded. Yeah, you're right." They left the bathroom together, looking around nervously for any sign of the mobster or his associates. They grabbed their things from the dressing room, told the club manager they were leaving immediately due to a family emergency, and got the hell out of Miami. They never went back to that club. They never talked about it publicly. Jerry Lewis only mentioned it briefly in his memoirs, and even then, he didn't name the club or provide specific details. But the incident changed their relationship. From that moment on, Dean Martin looked at Jerry Lewis differently. This wasn't just his comedy partner. This was the man who literally stepped between him and a bullet.
Jerry had saved his life. In the years that followed, Martin and Lewis would go on to even greater success. More movies, more TV shows, more sold-out performances. But by 1956, their partnership would end bitterly. They'd stopped speaking to each other for 20 years. But that night in Miami, in that bathroom, with a mobster's gun pointed at Dean's stomach, none of that mattered. In that moment, Jerry Lewis proved what true friendship looked like. He stepped in front of a gun for his partner. Years later, when people would ask Jerry why he did it, his answer was always simple: because he was my friend, and you don't let your friends get shot in a bathroom by a mobster over a misunderstanding. Dean Martin never forgot what Jerry did that night. Even during the years when they weren't speaking, even during the bitterness and the lawsuits and the public feuding, Dean always remembered. Jerry Lewis had saved his life, and no amount of professional disagreements could change that. When they finally reconciled in 1976, orchestrated by Frank Sinatra on Jerry's muscular dystrophy telethon, one of the first things Dean said to Jerry was a callback to that night in Miami. "You still saving my ass, Jer?" Jerry laughed. "Somebody's got a pal." The story of Martin and Lewis is often told as a tragedy, the greatest comedy duo in history torn apart by ego and ambition. But before all that, before the breakup and the silence and the regret, there was a moment in a Miami nightclub bathroom where Jerry Lewis looked at a mobster's gun and decided his friend's life was worth more than his own. That's not just comedy partnership, that's brotherhood. Dean Martin spent his entire career projecting an image of cool detachment. Nothing bothered him, nothing scared him. But that night in Miami, he was scared. He was staring death in the face, and he knew it. And Jerry Lewis, the manic comedian who made millions laugh, stepped between his partner and death itself. The gun that mobster was holding would have killed Dean Martin instantly. One pull of the trigger, and the world would have lost one of its greatest entertainers. No Rat Pack, no That's Amore, no Dean Martin show. All of it would have ended in a nightclub bathroom in Miami. But it didn't, because Jerry Lewis loved his partner enough to risk his own life. That's the real story of Martin and Lewis, not the breakup, not the years of silence, the moment when Jerry walked into a bathroom, saw a gun pointed at Dean's stomach, and stepped in front of it. That's what made them more than just a comedy team. That's what made them brothers. And no matter how bitter their professional relationship became, that moment in Miami, that act of pure, selfless courage, defined who they really were to each other. Dean Martin once said, "Jerry Lewis saved my life. I owe him everything." He wasn't exaggerating. He meant it literally, because one night in Miami, Jerry Lewis looked death in the face and said, "Not today, not my partner." And the mobster, somehow, incredibly, walked away.